Dr. Christina Greer is back, and we are so happy that she is. I've just talked about and read some of your piece at the New York Times, and I'm very happy to see you. How are you? Thank you for joining me.
I'm always happy to see you. I've been birding a lot. I've been thinking about you. I've been in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden quite a bit.
Birding, in case you didn't hear what you said, she and I love nature and share a lot of nature pictures and interests, and you just went, as did our friend Ophir Eisenberg. There must be something happening at the Brooklyn Botanical. I believe that's the cherry blossoms. Is that the deal?
Cherry blossoms, it's just also a great because they have so many diverse trees and we're dealing with like new migrations. Folks are now starting to come back from the South. You just get some great birds this time of year. And you always get beautiful cardinals and blue jays and miscellaneous warblers, but it's just so much bird diversity there. And unlike the New York Botanic Garden, which is in the Bronx, it's not as big, so you just don't feel like there's hidden nooks and crannies. It feels very doable and it's gorgeous. And
Living there, is that a thing you do seasonally or randomly or ever so frequently?
I always say it's the best. I think it's $85 a year to become a member, either 75 or 85. I always tell people it's the best $85 I've ever spent because it's like having your own private park. You can just walk around. They have these plaques for like famous New Yorkers. So there's Big Daddy Kane, there's Houdini. It's just like Harry Houdini, not Houdini the rapper. I realize that could be confusing.
Oh yeah, I was really confused about that. Unfortunately, Trump just took the Houdini it down because he was a DEI magician.
This man. So yeah, I mean, they have beautiful like Japanese pagoda and a shrine. It's lovely. It's really lovely and cute little cafe if you want a little hot cocoa or cookie. And it makes me, there's a Shakespeare garden with all these different herbs from the different plays. I could go on and on. It's really just one of these places that just makes me so incredibly happy. And I have my favorite trees that I hug. They have a whole like Native American section. It's really well thought out and great.
I want to go there with you someday. I think you should charge people to go with you because you know so much about it. You could point to so many things.
That might be illegal. It's their park. But I'm more than happy to take you around so we can just, I'll show you I have 4 favorite trees that I like to hug. And then there's this massive tree called a Caucasian wingnut that just makes me happy.
That is not the name of the tree.
It is absolutely the name of the tree. I'll send you a picture. And I took a picture of the placard. I was like, that clearly had to be a Black botanist that was like fed up one day.
That is really leading me to a lot of different jokes. That is the Caucasian wingnut,
Caucasian
aka the Stephen Miller.
wingnut.
That is the Charlie Kirk of trees. Why? I wonder why they hurt that tree with that name. It doesn't seem like a nice name. Poor tree didn't do anything.
Maybe he's from the Caucasus region. I don't know.
Oh yeah, probably. Probably. There's a lot to talk with you about. First, I just want to talk quickly about New York City politics, which you cover as well as anybody. And I don't know that everybody listening cares so much about New York City politics, but they probably should. It's often a harbinger, and it's really fascinating and the history and all of it. But mainly, we're talking about a mayoral race, and apparently Eric Adams, the New York City mayor, the embattled New York City mayor, has decided he's not going to be a Democrat anymore. Andrew Cuomo is running, which is crazy because he shouldn't be anywhere near any public office given his past. What do you want to tell us, a national audience, about what's going on in New York City politics, particularly the mayoral race?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important race. Our budget is larger than most countries. And the amount of money that comes through the city, but also the level of dignitary. So like the leadership of New York does matter. It's not surprising that Eric Adams is running as an independent. He was a Republican many years ago. Strategically, I think it's a brilliant move. If you can do it, you have the name recognition, and he doesn't have the matching funds and the money to really be competitive in this June 24th, very crowded. We now have, this will be our second election season where we have ranked choice voting. You can rank up to 5 people. They rolled that out in 2021 with very little education as to what it does strategically, how it works. Some advocates say it helps candidates of color and marginalized groups. Some argue that it hurts candidates of color and marginalized groups. It definitely, in a race like this where, would Andrew Cuomo, some people, voters aren't necessarily rational. So some people really like Zohran Mamdani, right? Who's super, super progressive. He's probably the most leftist of everyone in the race. But some people are like, oh, he won't win. So I'll vote Cuomo number 2. So wait, what?
Right.
Like, they couldn't be more different. Some people don't really know how the ranked choice voting system works. So some will only rank one person. Some might rank all 5, up to 5 options. Some people are like, I only have 3, so I'm only going to rank 3. And obviously, when people participate in different ways in the system, that changes things. Don't forget, also on your ballot, there's several races that are not ranked choice. So we're also asking voters to educate themselves on quite a bit. And granted, it's their democracy, sure, but this rollout, I think, with no real education was done pretty poorly. But that does make Eric Adams competitive in November. We have Curtis Sliwa, who's running as the Republican, he's like the red beret subway guy. Sadly, he is on the ballot, and we should take him seriously. I think we should always take people seriously if they're on the ballot, because there is a very real world where, let's just say, a progressive candidate gets through, and New York's not necessarily a progressive city. It's not a hardcore blue city by any stretch of the imagination. You have sort of crazy red beret Republican guy, middle of the road, embattled for mayor Eric Adams, and then someone else on the Democratic Party ticket, which the general is not ranked choice voting. And that could just give us, we have no idea what the results will be.
It would seem that from my vantage point, which is none, really, I feel like the biggest issues would be like housing and immigration that would animate people. Obviously, the economy and public transportation, the price of things always matter. But what are New Yorkers most concerned about, or what are the candidates running on?
Yeah, affordable housing obviously is always a big thing. The migrant crisis / public safety is always big. The big shadow that's hanging over the primary race, I moderated an event a few weekends ago for the Working Families Party and The Nation magazine, which was like, how are you going to deal with Donald Trump? How are you going to deal with a president who on any given Tuesday will wake up and say, I'm actually not giving you the $500 million that was promised for whatever it is, whether it's education or the environment or transportation or whatever money, right? I'm going to starve either Albany or New York City directly. So the question I think on a lot of voters' minds is, do you use a carrot or do you use a stick? Are you going to do honey or are you going to do vinegar? So in Andrew Cuomo's 17-minute introductory campaign video, they have a storied past. Obviously, these two Queens boys have known each other for many decades. But when Andrew Cuomo was governor and Donald Trump was president the first time during COVID, I don't know if you remember, many New Yorkers from across the country, or many Americans from across the country, looked at Andrew Cuomo as the guide, the leader, before he had the nursing home scandal and obviously several, counting 11 MeToos, instances of sexual misconduct. But before that, there are people from California and Colorado calling me like, oh my gosh, I wish your governor could be our governor. Because you remember he had his charts and he was like, hey, don't inject yourself with bleach. Make sure you wash your hands. You're trying to.
Yeah, I never thought everybody thought it was so wonderful, and I never thought it was impressive. I always feel like people doing their job is not that impressive. And New York was the tip of the spear with COVID. He was giving daily press conferences. Every governor would have done it. They all would have been flanked by experts with charts to look like they're in control. And I was just like, yeah, he's doing. It was like giving Trump credit for developing the vaccine. Like anybody would have done what he did. Oh, he took away the red tape. Everybody would have done that. He's just doing his job. I'm not giving you extra credit. But then, nonetheless, it tricked people, in my opinion, into thinking Andrew Cuomo was some wonderful leader, when in fact he's a prick. Always has been.
Yeah, and a bully. There are a lot of people who, in that question of how are we going to get goods and resources for New York City with Donald Trump as the president, who clearly is on like a revenge vendetta tour. Some people want a bully to match a bully.
Right.
And that is something that Andrew Cuomo is kind of threading. He's also doing what I would argue like a less is more tour, where he's not participating in any of the forums, of which there are forums almost every night. He's just essentially quiet, right? Let me just run on my name and kind of the memories. And some people have very positive memories of him. So you don't have to ask me hard questions about housing, right? Public housing, because he's on the other side of the tin can. Usually people are coming to the governor, he was there for almost 3 full terms, asking for money. Here, it's, as mayor, do you know how the budget really works from this side of the table? Do you understand Mitchell-Lama? Do you understand our public housing? Do you understand sort of our rent guidelines and the difference between rent control and the various subsidies that we have, the real estate corporations? He's been in Albany since he was 19 years old. I've always said that he's raised in captivity, but I'm not convinced that he knows much about New York City because he hasn't said anything. Until he actually starts talking about New York City, I'm going to go under the sort of assumption that he doesn't really know much about the various 5 boroughs. I don't think that there's anyone in this country that knows more about Albany, New York than Andrew Cuomo, period.
Yeah, his dad was there first.
And then, but as far as New York City, it's a very different story.
I just one point on this, which is I've tried to make the case and want to believe that as a Democrat, we still have a threshold for what we will not allow, a standard which must be met to win a primary, to be in public office. And if you have allegations, serious allegations, or even one, and it's not that serious, that you've assaulted or harassed woman or women, that usually would prevent you from winning a primary in almost any Democratic race. That is not the case here. And to me, that's a sign of the times. Maybe it's just an exception for this guy in this city, but I don't like it.
If you can have a president of the United States who's had credible lawsuits.
The Democratic Party was supposed to be supposed to have a higher standard. I wanted to believe.
And there are some people who are like, we're in different times and there were different. I will say women of a particular age, definitely during Andrew Cuomo's various MeToos, again, as I said, there were 11, they did range. And I think that there were some women, especially of a certain age, who were like, that's just the price of doing business in the workplace. Fine. Men kiss you on the mouth sometimes. By accident.
What do you think about those two different schools of thought? Women of a certain age who've seen it all, and now they're seeing these women and they're saying, oh, really? Why are you making so much noise or making such an issue? This is what is your opinion of those two different schools of thought of women of different generations on the issue of harassment, much less assault in the workplace?
Yeah, I think what's really hard, and we have not had that conversation as a society, which this country doesn't like to have hard conversations about complex issues. We'll get to that in a second. But I feel like as a Generation X person, I'm like wedged in the middle, right? Where I have students, it's like a zero tolerance policy, right? And then you have older women who are like, if we put every man in jail who was inappropriate, like, no, we'd have just full jails and we wouldn't have a functioning society. I think the hard conversation is we never had a real sit down with Me Too. It was like, it's Me Too, but there are a lot of gray areas in Me Too. I do think that kissing someone on the cheek against their permission is very different than a full-on sexual assault / rape. I do think that those two things are different. Do I think hitting someone on the butt, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose, I don't know, is different than forcing your tongue down their throat? I do think that those are different, but we also have right now, like this conversation of like due process. That does, listen, I am not in the school. I'll just put it this way. I'm not in the school of believe all women. I grew up with the stories of MPhil and Black men who were lynched because white women decided that for whatever reason that day they said that they were raped. I went to high school where white girls would date Black dudes. And when their parents found out, it was like, oh my God, I was raped. It's really, we all knew you were dating. So I'm not knee jerk in women tell the truth all the time. That is just not where I've been. I do err on the side of like caution and let's take them seriously, but I'm definitely not in the school of no matter what. I know for a fact this woman is the victim. That's not ever been my wheelhouse.
I appreciate all of that nuance, and I'm interested to hear more from women, especially on this issue.
And that is my opinion, right?
Sure.
Some women are definitely like believe all women no matter what. And I'm like, not as a Black woman, at least for me, not as a Black woman. I'm not in that school of thought.
We could talk about this for the rest of the interview. I want to get to, I'm pausing because I really want to pivot to your article in the New York Times. You have a piece in the New York Times titled Black Americans Are Not Surprised. Already talked a little bit about it before I brought you in here on the show, but let me just real quick. I wasn't surprised when I saw that you had been written an essay in the New York Times because I think you're tops.
Thanks.
In the world of writing.
How about that?
And what?
It's my third.
I figured you'd done it before.
As much smack as I talk about the New York Times, and I talk a lot of smack about them. It was my third.
That's fine. I don't think that has the two have anything to do with each other. I think that you can criticize yourself, your school, your institution, anywhere, and also be a part of it and contribute to it. So my quick question was like, do they reach out and say? Because sometimes they reach out and say, we would love to have you write this, or was this something that you were shopping around, or that you wanted to write? Which way did it start?
It's funny. I pitched it to them.
You did.
And I was like, hey, essentially The 3-sentence pitch was, until white people understand Black history, we're not going to get out of this moment. And Black history is American history. And the fact that most people don't know it leaves them befuddled at this particular moment. So the editor says, hey, write it up and give it to me by Thursday. This is like a Wednesday. And sadly, this story is evergreen, what we call when we write op-eds, right? Just like an evergreen tree, I can publish it in March or April. I can publish it in September, right? There's certain stories that aren't evergreen. If it's the anniversary of 100-year anniversary of blah, 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 like that's not an evergreen story. We got to get it done. Whereas this is, sadly, it's okay, discrimination against Black people. We can publish this story whenever. I went out the night before with some colleagues and had a lovely evening. That's the adult version of saying had a lovely evening. And when I got home, I was like, oh my gosh, my Thursday is completely packed. I'm not going to have time to write this op-ed that I promised the editor. And so I woke up at 6 a.m. and I've clearly been thinking about this. I was at UCLA last month. I had some really good conversations with some colleagues. I had done a panel at Brown the week before and had really good. So I was like, clearly it was inside of me that I needed to get it out. And so I just woke up at 6 a.m. and I wrote 1,200 words in 30 minutes and sent it off.
Wow. It is a wonderful and important piece. You're right. I think my late grandmother, Lillian McCrae, quite often these days, she might have completed only a portion of 9th grade, but living in the segregated South gave her and other Black people of her generation, she was born in 1921, an education in what Americans are capable of. She saw a lot, maybe too much. In one of our many long talks on her Yulee, Florida porch, she said of this country, the only time you should be surprised is when you're surprised. I'm sure you had many wonderful conversations with Grandma Lillian. What did she mean by that then?
And we took this other sentence out, which is, and by surprise, she meant white people, like this country, like white people should not surprise you, nor should their behavior. By the way, that town Yulee that she's from is named after Senator Yulee, who's the first Jewish senator in the history of the United States. Just as an aside, I just love miscellaneous American facts because we have things around us that we don't even know about. So
to a certain extent, I'm happy. It makes sense to take that sentence out, not because it would offend, but because it is too specific. Because it would seem that Black folks, I almost think it's a good edit because Black folks are not surprised about all kinds of different things that aren't necessarily connected strictly to white people. Could be other people, could be other things, but it's the idea that you present here. I feel like that matters more.
This is why editors are great. Because it's like I write. I also forget that I can be direct, right? And I'm used to talking about race. I'm used to talking about race, and I think that this is a broad audience, and so they're just like subtle edits that the editor made that I think just made it a stronger piece. He asked me for some examples, and I was like, oh, Stacey Abrams, Higher Heights, right? Kamala Harris, these are the women who warned us about this. I had something in there about birding that they took out, but that's okay. Sometimes it does detract from the larger message, but a lot of it was just like minor copy editing. But yeah, what I wanted to say was just like, until white people especially understand Black history and this moment, that is very common to Black people and like very familiar, you are going to be shocked and dismayed. But it's like, you have to understand the capacity of your fellow Americans, like to essentially hunt people down in this country and destroy what is really good and what is really great about this country. And I think a lot of Americans white Americans in particular, don't think that's possible. But it is. Like, you've heard stories about not just chattel slavery, but Jim Crow and Native American expulsion and almost near extermination. You've heard stories about reckless global expansion and what we've done to people abroad. You've heard these stories. You have to know that the possibility and the capacity is real.
In the last 20 years, there have been several very popular, widely seen films, much less documentaries, books, and so on. It's like you're saying you have to heard. It's not like we only learned it if we did anything in history.
cell phones, you've seen it. And so this level of cruelty also that was promised, right? It's not like you didn't know it was promised. Kamala Harris kept saying in the debates and in interviews, and these interviewers were like, he's not really, basically, you're being a histrionic Black lady. And she's, are you serious? Listen to me. Like, I'm telling you, this man will make good on these promises that are in Project 2025 and in debates. And he's like, it's not me, which many people knew that was going to be the case. So now that we're on the other side of January 20th and folks like, oh my gosh, I didn't think he'd actually do it. It's like, he promised it. You didn't think he would do it to you. And this is where we are right now as a country. You were in the find out stage because you messed around and voted for this man, or you couldn't vote for this Black woman and you voted for this election cicada, Jill Stein, or whatever you told yourself you needed to do to make sure that Donald Trump got back into office. And now we're seeing that the boot of oppression, as I say in the piece, doesn't just extend to Black people, in particular immigrants. It's extending to all Americans unless we come to the realization that we have to band together.
You're right. Black people are not surprised. Far too many well-meaning white Americans have been what I like to call ally ostriches, believing in progress while burying their heads in the sand when discussions around the past become uncomfortable. Or newer Americans, perhaps the children of immigrants of recent decades, who don't see what business it is of theirs, what violence slave owners or Jim Crow enforcers visited on their fellow citizens, or the legacy of it. And now some of them are seeing people who look like them summarily deported. How did this happen, you ask? I'm an ally ostrich. I did not think that they were going to start erasing actual, like taking names and down and plaques down and changing websites and going into the African American Museum in DC, the Smithsonian Museum, and wanting to make efforts to change the slavery exhibits there, apparently, as the reporting yesterday. I didn't think they were going to go so far as using the federal government to erase current things and websites. So I'm an ostrich.
I'm like, and my question is like, why not? Why didn't you think you would do that? It's laid out and promised in Project 2025. And B, as so many Black women, the 92% of us who I mentioned in the piece, we said time and time again, not just Chrissy Greer, but everybody was saying the first time around, he's just casing the joint. And he had good meaning Republicans around him at different points in time who said this is an overreach and it's a bridge too far. There were enough people around him who put on some guardrails to protect the democracy, because much of our democracy is just norms. It's not necessarily laws. It's just modes of behavior. And the way I explain that to my students, it's like when I walk into the classroom, I stand in the front, you all are sitting in chairs, you're looking at me. At a certain point in time, I start talking, you all start writing, and we interact for an hour and 15 minutes, no disruptions. That's not a law. That's a norm. That's just how we behave. But if by some random chance I changed that, they changed it, they started not sitting in chairs or turning their backs, whatever it may be, coming in and out of the bus station, they're not breaking the law. So it's just norms. And so many Black women were like, listen, the first time he took notes, and Steve Miller and Steve Bannon took notes on what is a law and these norms that we're just so accustomed to. It's okay, so we can start to undo norms, and then we can really start to undo laws. And there's so many beautiful Easter eggs in the Constitution, Federalist 51, checks and balances, separation of powers. But if you start to erode all of those separations of powers and all of those checks and balances, and the executive branch was never meant to be this strong, and you can have a feckless Congress that's also of your party, keep in mind, Donald Trump is solely disinterested in the legislative process, even though he has unified government, which is the Republicans control the House and the Senate. He could actually make laws. He's not interested in that. He likes executive orders, which are they're two tools that Congress, the framing fathers, I don't like to call them the fathers. I like to call them the framers, not the founding fathers. But they're two tools that they gave the executive branch because they wanted it relatively weak and just like a step above a clerk. And the two tools are the veto and executive orders. But you can always overturn executive orders by judicial action. But if you control the courts and you stack them the first time around, then you've got a Supreme Court and a John Roberts who will say, no, it's okay.
Yeah, very well said. You also say in this piece, in the midst of this fear and real threats to democracy, most Black people are not only not surprised, but also tired out by explaining why all of this is not surprising. And yes, I'm aware there are a few black ostriches too. This is why many of the 92% of black women who have been the, quote, keepers of the Democratic Party and democracy writ large have been resoundingly silent. Why did no one listen to us? I was so moved by that cartoon or drawing of black women on top of the building watching the city burn. I can't describe it. Probably a lot of people saw it, but to me, it was a good picture example of what you're writing there. Why did no one listen to us? Why did no one listen to you?
Why would people listen to the cleanup women, which is what I write about in the piece, right? In the sort of patriarchy, racial, anti-black, white supremacist nation that we live in, it's like, we're not men. And that's the sort of the promise of white supremacy and patriarchy always dangles that in front of black men, even though by and large they don't take the bait. We're not white women, which is the promise of they're the only ones who can make white men. So they're always going to be a protected class. And we know that our sisterhood can only go but so far because of that. So it's like we are in the non-dominant group, at least in America, in both ways. And I think the Pulitzer Prize winning photo from April 5th was all these white folks marching in the street and black people having brunch. I didn't get myself into this.
Oh, from
I
this
talked
past
to
Saturday, that the
this past
hands off.
Saturday. I'm so curious to see the number of black people who actually attended because I don't know a single black person in my very expansive
I
Rolodex
attended. I was
attended one march.
I was part of two events last week. I hosted an event, and there was 200 indivisible members from Rockland County, and then I was at the protest in Rockland County. There's plenty of black folks here.
Were
Very
they at the
few.
march?
Very few. It looked
Listen,
like
the memo went out. Stay your black behind home. We didn't get into this mess, and the only way that we're going to get out of it is when white folks recognize the mess that they have made. That is essentially the memo that went out. And from top to bottom, I wasn't interested in the women's march and the pink knitting hats. The first time around, I was like, you're not going to catch me catching pneumonia just because you didn't talk to your parents and your siblings about the
that's
dangers
not
of this
a
man.
thing.
It was like, absolutely not. Knit your own hat. Leave me alone. And
That
now
is,
you want me to come out and march again because you didn't do your work again? You didn't deliver white women again? No, I'm not doing it.
well, I'm not doing it.
And I'm really curious to see the number of black people who actually marched because we are solely disinterested. As I said in the piece, we're learning line dances. We're looking at Meghan Markle take snacks out of a big bag and put them in a small bag, bottle up water, make labels.
Now,
Fine.
now take us inside the conversation with black folks and particularly with black women. What are you saying on those texts about us?
White folks, you can get yourselves out of this mess.
You don't
The
say
only way that we are going to get out of this mess is if white people snap out of it. And sadly, the number of texts that I've gotten where I'm like, you have completely missed the point of my op-ed. I just got one just now. I had such a great time at the march. And I'm like, you missed it.
It's very interesting when someone publishes something in the New York Times. I'm sure this happens to you when you're on TV or when you publish anything, but especially you publish something like this in the New York Times. So a lot of people sharing it. I shared it. You probably get a lot more reactions. What have been the reactions to this piece since it went up yesterday?
This one so far has been pretty positive, knock on wood. I always have to give my admin a heads up because I get lots of hate mail for sure. And she was like, no, surprisingly, no hate. And she's like, no terrible phone calls and no hate mail. She's had a crash course in racism and sexism since she became my admin. But yeah, she said this one so far. I've gotten lots of really thoughtful comments from Black women who've said, you're saying what I was feeling, but I didn't know how to put it in that particular language. I've gotten some really thoughtful comments from Black women who are leaders of nonprofits who are like, you said the thing that I can't say because I'm still trying to raise money. There are lots of white folks who are like, I have been thinking about this, but didn't really know how to put it into words. And I'll think about this. And then some other white people are just like, I'm wearing my pink hat and I'm marching right now. And it's at another person on our group chat gives this long, and this reminds me of like others and bubble and disability studies. And I was like, you are doing everything in your power to have a conversation that is not the conversation that I'm having.
Oh, I love that range of reactions. I was just going to send you a picture of my head on an ostrich.
Yes, there are lots. Crazy enough, though, and we love birds, there's no ostrich emoji.
Oh, huh. Yeah, I don't think an ostrich is even a bird. Is
Want
it?
to know when I eat it, the meat tastes like
Oh,
steak.
of
So
course. Of
it's red
course.
meat. In my freezer, I've got goat, I've got oxtail, I've
Yeah.
got ostrich, I've got bison, I've got duck, I've got fish, chicken. If it runs, swims, or walks or flies, I'm going to
And
eat it.
that's why I reacted that way, just in case people don't know.
Sorry,
I know
vegetarians out there.
Lucy really well. I know that she eats anything that moves.
Yeah, I do. If I'm not allergic to it, it's fair game.
I'm looking. Oh, it is a bird. Ostriches are the world's largest and heaviest living
They're
birds known.
huge. They're huge. Have you ever seen one? They're very
Yeah,
tall.
yeah, I was attacked by one when I was a young boy.
Oh. And the oil, like the oil underneath their
Yeah, let me
feathers,
finish. I
spend lots of money. It's face cream.
I ended up killing it and inventing oil, ostrich oil. If you would have let me finish, that's what happened. I'm like Reacher, basically.
That's what happened.
I don't know
I
if
went
you.
to an ostrich farm in outside of Bogota.
Yeah, I've been to the same one.
Yeah, of course. But like the eggs are a thing, the feathers are a thing, but the meat is delicious.
Why?
There's a lot
I don't know where the phrase "put your head in the sand like an ostrich" came from, but it is a good getting
because
back
that's how they
to.
dig for things in the sand.
Oh, but getting back to the idea that it means that you have your head in the sand, that you're not paying attention, that you're
Because
not.
their butts are in the air and their heads are
Right.
completely down under and like they're vulnerable.
I remember I've said this a million times, but the first time I realized that Black Americans were not surprised, the first overt time at least, was when I was interviewing a comedian named Bruce, who's a Black man. It
Oh, I
was
love Bruce.
a couple years after 9/11, and I was talking about terrorism and being afraid of terrorists. And he just started laughing. It was like a comedy show, it was comedians, but the context mattered. But he just started laughing really hard. And then he went off on a bit about how he loved watching white people be afraid after 9/11. And then he
Okay.
made me understand that they saw the Klan as the same way that white people saw Al Qaeda. Black people saw the Klan. So we've always seen terrorism. And so I was like, oh, so you're not surprised. And that was my
Right.
kind of
But I
innocence.
would argue that the difference is Al Qaeda in America is like 10 people, and the Klan in America could be anybody.
I think that if you're a well-meaning white WMW, an ally, if you will, you could learn this lesson, but then forget it pretty easily. I think I tend to do that as close as I am with so many Black folks in my life on a pretty regular basis.
Mm.
Even if you were married into a Black family or whatever, you immersed in Black culture somehow, you could still easily forget and be surprised, is my thesis idea.
And I would argue that what a luxury that must be.
Oh, it's wonderful.
So like,
Wonderful. Just being a man and never having to worry,
hey, like most women, this is the beauty of the brain, but especially at a certain age, I'm mid 40s, so I've aged out of like much of the danger zone, but I'm definitely not out of it. But it's, hey, let's just try and live a life where you're not like raped by a stranger.
but short of that, in between rape by a stranger is looks and harassment
All of
daily.
that.
And
Listen, to our Cuomo point, if I had a freaking dollar for every man in a professional setting who accidentally kissed me on the side of my mouth, right? It's like I'd be close to a millionaire. It happens so regularly. The number of men who are hand talkers and graze your boobs or like accidentally graze your butt. Yeah. I tell a lot of my guy friends and they're like, what? I'm like, you're not skeevy. But let's be clear. There are a lot of men where it's just these are the cheap shots. And I call it the hologram sexism, where it's like if when men say and do certain things where it's like, if I were to explain it, you're like, Chrissy, he just said blah, blah, blah. Or like, it was just a look, or it was an accident. And it's, you don't see it, but just like a hologram, someone else from a different angle sees it very clearly. And there's some men who are really good at hologram sexism, where it's just like to say something. It's like, when I said this, he said it in this tone. And it's a frequency that certain men use where they know that they're being skeevy, but you can't really pin it down. Like the
super.
wave has already receded back into the ocean by the time you can say something.
That's a good metaphor. Speaking of hologram sexism, it's the name of my band, and we are playing. It's awkward to admit now. We're playing this Thursday at CBGB's. So sorry about that. I've never heard that term. It's
It's my term.
Yeah.
Because I think like when MeToo was happening, and it's like the amount of hologram sexism that I've dealt with in a professional setting is like, it's a lot. I call, like, there's certain men who have mastered, they tend to be of a certain age too. They've mastered the lower back, upper ass.
Eee,
It's like
eee.
perfect. It's like a perfect place on your body.
I was saying this, I was having a conversation with a woman recently privately about this. And I was, speaking of the title of your piece is Black Americans Are Not Surprised. This conversation is now Women Are Not Surprised. I am surprised to hear that men are still touching in a work atmosphere at all touching. I remember Steve Bannon putting his hand on a woman's lower back like that as you're describing. And I remember being horrified by it and thinking it was just because he was such an awful creep. Seeing him do that when I shared a studio with him, it's serious. But like, have you not noticed a difference in just actual touching, in whether it be academia? You straddle both because you'll
Yeah.
be in media spaces and nonprofits and
I mean, older men are going to do what they're going to do. I had
yeah,
an older colleague once say something that was wildly inappropriate when he was in my office and we were having like an important meeting. So the door was closed, which I very rarely ever have my door fully closed. And he said something super inappropriate. And I was like, hey, that is absolutely inappropriate and never to be repeated again. And he was like, ugh, Chrissy, are you one of these Me Too people? I was like, yes, I am. Right? Like, sure, put me in the bucket of being a Me Too lady. But I think, what's important and what a lot of men don't understand is this is the thing that your moms definitely experienced if they worked outside of the home, right?
yeah.
Or your sisters and your wives. But it's sadly something that like your two daughters have probably experienced this in ways that whether it's articulated or not, right? Because there was so much of when like Me Too started where I looked up and I was like, wait, that's a Me Too? Oh, I just thought that was like normal behavior. I didn't know that it was like even inappropriate behavior because it happens so often.
Yeah.
It's just part of, I don't live in bubble wrap inside my house. I got to work. So it's if I work with men and by and large, they say and do inappropriate stuff sometimes. But there are ranges, right? So it's no one has ever walked up to me like when I was in like the Naples train station and like, goosed my boob. Have I been in multiple work settings where someone has accidentally touched my boobs? Sure. Right. This is why I dress like a eunuch when I do presentations, because you start to tell yourself, it's like, oh, maybe I stood too closely and I do have boobs. So like maybe it was me.
Right.
And it's no, or maybe they're just some men who are really good at always cop and appeal.
I'm looking forward to your next column. Women Are Not Surprised, because we started talking more about gender here, but that's all disappointing and upsetting and totally understandable. And I guess unsurprising is where I should end.
What are you gonna do?
I love you and appreciate you. And this is such a good piece. I hope everybody reads it and shares it, and always looking forward to whatever's next with you. Thank you very much for doing this with me today, as always.
I always love spending time with you.